Hello, everyone. Welcome back for another edition of Total Nerd Talk Throwback Thursdays edition. I'm really excited to be coming to you guys to talk about one of my favorite characters. Should be no surprise, the amazing Spider-Man. And I'm really looking forward to showing you some pieces related to Spider-Man from the Marvel Encyclopedia book I have here. And the reason I kind of went with Spider-Man for this week's edition is it's really a two-parter. I mean, overall, number one, I'm just really having like some Marvel withdrawal. I mean, for the past several years, we've been so accustomed to having a movie coming out or talking about an extra credit scene or multiple movies in one year. It was always part of the nerd culture chatter. And it's just, I mean, we ended a huge phase with the end of the Avengers movies that just recently came out, plus just movies in general going through a huge dynamic shift. So I really want to kind of dive into some of our favorite characters, maybe for the next few weeks. Maybe it'll be a little series of Marvel characters. And anywho, Spider-Man, the part two is the only official birthday we've had for Spider-Man was the Tom Holland Spider-Man, August 10th, 2001. So I mean, we're in August, why not pay homage to a Marvel character whose birthday just passed? If you're a big comic book fan, there was never an exact birthday given. I mean, if you can find that, show it to me, but I'm pretty certain it's just been mentioned that Peter was a Libra. So kind of end of September into October birthday. But as we all know, Tom Holland, we saw that passport image showing August 10th, 2001. So that's kind of why I'm dealing with Spider-Man. And I also think it's pretty relevant with the new PS5 game that was announced for Spider-Man, a Miles Morales story, which I'm personally looking forward to. I really enjoyed the PS4 Spider-Man game. And as I was going through the encyclopedia, I saw some elements from the comic that they took and put into the game. And it's just overall cool to see how writers, creators, they go with a new path somewhat, but they're always taking from elements of the old, but they put their own spin on it. So those are the two things I really kind of be trying to pinpoint when I show you some excerpts from the Marvel Encyclopedia, right? So let's switch over to that. So as we dive into the encyclopedia, I'll introduce you to my miniature Spider-Man assistant here, who I often use to point to parts of the text. And you see behind him, little cool art piece I had picked up from Comic-Con. Oh, Comic-Con, how I'm gonna miss you this year. I mean, I know we're gonna touch on it virtually, but it's not the same in person. I mean, this is one of my favorite pieces I picked up there, but anyway, let's not get sidetracked. But I thought it was relevant for a little talk on Spider-Man. I really love this piece. So, enter the Spider-Man section of the encyclopedia. I figured as we go through this, I'm not gonna literally sit here and read it all, but I thought it would be more interesting to kind of take it from the first page until I get to the parts I want to focus on. And as we all know, I mean, it really begins with the origins. How many times have we heard the Uncle Ben story from all of the various editions of Spider-Man? It was cool that Tom Holland, they really didn't dwell on that part of the story. I guess the Garfield version was the last time they really mentioned that. Kind of talks about the high school era from Spider-Man into the college years. Mentions Gwen Stacy here, which was pretty cool. And I mean, it was nice that they kind of talked about her in Garfield's version, the sad demise of Gwen Stacy. We had mention of the symbiotes here. I think the first thing, or the main area that I wanted to focus on, was kind of the Mephisto period of the Spider-Man history, because it's not an area that I was fortunate enough to read about. And I mean, guys like Aunt May gets shot, and it kind of leads to some. Well, to recap, uh, see up here it talks about Civil War and the parts when Peter Parker sided with Tony Stark in the Civil War, and it resulted in him even releasing his identity. Kind of a real Tony Stark move. Kind of reminds you of how Far From Home ended, even though it wasn't intentional. When Tom Holland's Spider-Man's identity was revealed through like one of Mysterio's plots. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. But as we move on, long story short, after May being shot, like Peter was trying to resort to ways to deal with her healthcare bills. You even see him confronting Iron Man there. But what ended up happening, they made a deal, him and Mary Jane, with Mephisto. And an alternate reality was created, and the cost was the love of Mary Jane and Peter, which is some pretty sad stuff. But it was the way that he was able to secure Aunt May's health. But interestingly, something that I didn't know, in this alternate reality, Aunt May now did some volunteer work at a homeless shelter working under philanthropist Martin Lee. So fans of the PS4 Spider-Man game know Martin Lee, Mr. Negative. I mean, spoilers, but game's been out a while now, so hope you guys would know. That's cool. That's where they grabbed that character from for the Spider-Man game, which I found rather interesting. So I often wonder, creators, how do they decide the little bits and pieces of the history that they'll grab? Because, I mean, obviously, it's not linear from what they do or how they go about doing it when they grab things. Like, let's look over here. There's a part on the prior page. You'll see some mention over here of when Peter went up against Spider-Queen, and after being mutated into the giant spider, something that we all probably remember from the animated series, at least him becoming a giant spider. But in the comics, when he returned to human form, he had gained his increase in powers and ability to produce organic webbing. So, I mean, another thing that the Tobey Maguire version, I mean, they kind of started off with that, which really introduced us to Spider-Man on the big screen and kind of the reincarnation of superheroes on the big screen in general. But they went ahead and just jumped into the organic webbing, whereas that's something that happened a little bit later on in the development of Spider-Man in terms of the comic. I'm actually glad they kept it in Garfield's and Holland's Spider-Man, more from the web cartridges. But I found that interesting that it actually happened this later on. I didn't know in terms of the chronology when that had occurred. And last but not least, Miles Morales. Looking forward to that game coming out on the PS5. Just because, Miles has different powers from Peter, and he never really started off kind of owning his newfound ability and skills the way Peter did. And who knows where we'll go from this. I mean, are we going to get into the Spider-Verse 2? I think we should. There's so much more that can happen from that. What'll happen after this game? What villain will be mentioned in Spider-Man 3 with Tom Holland, when and if we get that? I think Mephisto's not a bad villain to mention, especially with all the reality altering that's been going on. He's related, Doctor Strange has gone against him, and we all know that the MCU is all linked, so what you get for one character can very easily be linked to another. And there's all these other Spider-Mans that we can dwell on in the future or bring back in. I mean, hint, hint, Spider-Verse did that so well. So I'm excited for what the future brings, guys. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.